Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to your Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. Welcome to the show. Let's talk about the Pelicans offseason so far. Let's get into it because if you ask outside analysts and if you look at the online reports and whatnot, the Pelicans front office is not having a great offseason. But if you ask the fan base, there's real hope as they look towards the season ahead. So how do we make sense of the disconnect between what experts are saying and what the fans believe? CBS Sports did a poll or a ranking of the front offices of the 30 teams in the NBA, and they posted the Pelicans as the 29th ranked front office. Only the Detroit Pistons were lower in those rankings. The criticism comes from the Pelicans' lack of clear direction, the overall failure, and a lot of these go back to David Griffin. So it's not just the performance of Joe Dumars in this offseason, but overall, the overall view from a distance of what the Pelicans are as an organization. So the focus on a lack of clear direction, the failure to maximize Zion's early prime of his career, and the general confusion. Now, this goes to Joe Dumars, the confusion over whether or not the team is attempting to rebuild or if the team is committed to contention. There's also pushback on the handling of how the Brandon Ingram trade went down. Did the Pelicans make it at the right time? Did they get good enough assets in return for Brandon Ingram? And just the fact that the Pelicans have been relatively quiet this offseason other than their statements when it comes to Zion Williamson. The moves that they have made have been relatively quiet. It's hard to argue that the media doesn't have some basis for their criticisms. I think that a lot of them are within the realm of reason. The team's identity has been murky. We've been asking for the Pelicans to develop a persona, an identity, quite frankly, since they became the Pelicans. That has been a problem. Injuries have been a problem, certainly, but that's not completely on the organization there. That has to just rely on some just bad luck. But overall, you could say during the Zion Williamson era, these 6 now going into 7 years, that the Pelicans have made relatively few bold moves. They have made moves. They have changed the roster, but they have rarely made the kind of transformational move that an organization really going all in to try to win does. The closest to that would be the CJ McCollum trade. And even that was to take the Pelicans from missing the postseason to just being a team that could regularly make the postseason, which they did in 2 of 3 years of CJ's first 3 years in New Orleans. The problem with the Pelicans is that they are one of those teams that are in that NBA wasteland of perpetually stuck in the middle of whether you are going to be a contender or whether or not you're just mediocre. I will say that it feels like the Pelicans are getting a little too much criticism, because to put the Pelicans below organizations like the Washington Wizards or the Charlotte Hornets, who have their own dubious histories and in recent years have won less than the Pelicans, who their draft picks could also be questioned, and their development of their young players and their direction and their identity, all of those things could be just as much in question. I think it's a jumble. I mean, certainly the Pelicans could probably be a lot higher, but does it matter if you're 29th or 26th? Does it ultimately matter if the general consensus is that your team is not doing a good job? So when you look at the full offseason and what kind of potential grades are on the table for this team, because once you put together free agency, the trades that were made, and the draft, the picture is still mixed. It's still a lot of hope rather than a lot of evidence at this stage. Let me be clear that I am not making a presumptive judgment. I am only looking at the evidence we have today. That's all you can do. I think there's a quote by Gandhi that says, "It is not my job to be consistent with the truth. It's my job to adjust as it reveals itself each day." And I'm paraphrasing that. I probably ever, but the overall sentiment is the truth can only be consistent with the information you have. So today's truth maybe not be tomorrow's. But when you look at what the Pelicans have, when you look at free agency, very limited, obviously. You signed Kevon Looney, The criticism of that signing has been that he's overpriced and doesn't address the core issues of this franchise. Now, I will say that the overpay is just part of the deal when you're the Pelicans. We've talked about this enough times to say that there's a tax in the New Orleans Pelicans. Whenever you're trying to bring a free agent in, you probably have to pay a little more because of who you are. As far as addressing core issues, he doesn't provide scoring in the post, no. But he does make the Pelicans a better defensive team at the middle. He does make the Pelicans a better rebounding team in the middle. So I think he addresses some core issues. He is not the long-term solution at center, and I don't think anyone on this, either fans or the organization, believe that. There is a team opt-out after 1 year, so the Pelicans, if it doesn't work with Kevon Looney, they can move on after 1 year. The center market just wasn't particularly deep this offseason. I think the Pelicans did the best among what was available to them at the time. They did lock in Herb Jones. And I think that was a good win for the Pelicans overall. I know that it could be a problem down the road if the Pelicans don't win, but the investment in one of your core players, in your best defender in a league where the best teams have at least two All-NBA defenders. You come off a year, the NBA champions had two All-NBA defenders, and typically from year to year, you're going to see one or two, whether you talk about the Celtics and having Jaylen Brown and Derek White and Drew Holiday. You go back to the Bucks when you had Drew Holiday and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Brook Lopez and those types of guys. So you're going to have some defensive stalwarts on your team. You can't just build a team of 12 offensive players. So I think it's ultimately a win for the Pelicans to re-sign Herb Jones, though it doesn't feel, retaining your players doesn't feel like necessarily a win all of the time. It wasn't one of those moves that around the league is going to reverberate, but it certainly, I think, means something to New Orleans Pelicans fans who have mentioned that they'd love to see one player spend his career in New Orleans to be that kind of bellwether player that is here through consistently and who is the culture, who represents what the Pelicans are about. And for a team that doesn't have that, if Herb Jones can become that, or Trey Murphy or whomever, I think that would be important in establishing the identity of the franchise. When you look at the trade of swapping CJ McCollum for Jordan Poole, the upside of that is that you got a younger player with a similar skill set, who's a little bit taller, who has some different elements to his game as CJ. The issue that folks have with it, and the risk that comes in any of these types of moves, is that you had CJ, a team with limited financial flexibility. And I have been a big proponent of teams maintaining flexibility as best they can. The Pelicans had the ability to get off of that contract by just riding it out with CJ to the end of the season and getting some financial savings. That was one option to take. And there's criticism for the Pelicans in not doing that, considering the number of problems that they do have within the roster and the things they need to address. Could that money have been spent differently by allowing CJ to go off the market and then finding a player next year? Especially, I think for the Pelicans, their issue was about this season. I think that that's going to be the ultimate measure for Joe Dumars. They focused heavily on this season and are thinking about this season financially. They're thinking about this season roster-wise. And so those are going to lead to the contention. The results are the only thing that can make the opinions change, I think, of either side. So in the draft, the Pelicans were aggressive. They get Fears at 7. I think most people like that selection. They view him as a guy who's got tremendous upside. They like his makeup as a person and as a player. Queen is a guy that, again, because of the amount that the Pelicans gave up to get him, the position that he plays and where he fits, and what it costs the Pelicans financially in having him as a second first rounder this year, rather than offsetting those by having one first rounder this year and one next year. Those are the things that are going to determine. And now with his injury, Derek Queen, ultimately whether or not this trade becomes a success. And I think people view the trade right now, I think because of the oscillation of grades, it's viewed as a C deal, that it's kind of neutral, that his upside is dragged down by the consequences potentially of trading for him. So we'll have to see again how that develops. But again, the criticism is not unwarranted because the risk is there. We have to see how it plays out, and then we can find out how to properly evaluate it. But as of today, I think that's an accurate mark. PV, a solid player. You took him in the second round. You'll see what happens there. But I don't think it's anything to get super excited over. I think he had a decent summer league. Maybe you could have gotten a better player there, maybe, but maybe you could have gone for more height and athleticism, maybe. But the Pelicans took Peavy, and we'll see how he fits in. Overall, I think it's the major criticism is that does the offseason match what your intentions are? If you are intending to be a competitor in the Western Conference, are you doing enough to support that strategy? So you've made some smart short-term plays, but you've also taken some risky short-term and long-term gambles if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. So when experts rate them where they are in that bottom third of 20 to 30, they're not being unfair. But I think that overall Pelicans fans have bought into the idea that there's believable talent in the youth on this roster. They are going to hold their thoughts on Zion Williamson and allow him to be in. And I understand, again, it feels like, how many times are we going to do this? And I'd have to say this is the final time. It can't be any more with Zion Williamson. So I think if you're betting this is the final season, I'm betting on him to stay healthy, and he has to do that. If he doesn't, that makes everything else a little more concerning. It's kind of like pulling the pieces of Jenga and just hoping that your tower stays up. So I don't think it's unfair, but I think there's just so much wait and see. Pelicans fans have the right to be excited about Derek Queen, about the potential of Yves Missi, about Herb, about Trey, about Zion, all of those things, if those guys can stay healthy. Can they develop, though? Can Zion play 60-plus games? The culture is also something that seems to be more defined as far as just who they want and the types of players that they want. Certainly, Joe Dumars said that Herb Jones essentially embodies everything that he's looking for in a New Orleans Pelican. And it seems like the majority of this roster either has prior relationships or the current relationships for the players who have been here a while. That there's a lot of genuine excitement about them playing together. The four guys who have been here the longest now, Jose Alvarado, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, we know that they personally get along. We know that they enjoy playing together on the court. We know that Kevon Looney and Jordan Poole have a pre-existing relationship from their time in Golden State. And they're both, I believe, from the Milwaukee area as well. So their relationship goes back. You have this connection here with enough players that I think that you believe that the chemistry problems for the Pelicans could be eased because these guys generally know each other. And I think that what you have is that a fan base wants to believe in what the Pelicans can be. They have given the Pelicans as many chances as they possibly can, but they want to see a front office that makes competent decisions quickly and on time and doesn't wait until it's too late to make the move. The timing of all of these things becomes the most important factor. When do you make a move? Do you make a move? What's that move? So I think that you come into this, Pelicans do not want to have a team. Pelicans fans do not want to have a team that is continually and year in and year out perennially a play-in team. They want to have a perennial playoff team. You want to have that decade like the Memphis Grizzlies. You want to have a decade like the Portland Trailblazers, where you, even as a small market, you are there. You want to be in what the Minnesota Timberwolves are doing now and getting back-to-back Western Conference Finals appearances. You want to be the Oklahoma City Thunder and develop from a young team into a championship team. So yeah, the Pelicans are being treated like an afterthought nationally. You know that's the case whenever you're dealing with the New Orleans Pelicans. But maybe that's not the worst thing right now, is the spotlight is away from the Pelicans while they try to figure things out. And the local folks, your local media, your local fan base will be the ones who are keeping a close eye on the New Orleans Pelicans. So we'll still see if that potential is there. But that right now is the thing about all of this, is that it feels like everything about the Pelicans is about potential rather than what we know. We don't have a ton of facts. We have a ton of ideas and we have a ton of belief, but we don't have a ton of facts, and the clock is ticking for us to find out what is ahead for the New Orleans Pelicans. All right, let's see if there are some options in trying to fix the roster. Yesterday, I talked about Charles Bassey a bit as a potential option, the 25-year-old. He played for the San Antonio Spurs most recently. He played for the Boston Celtics during Summer League as a free agent. He got a lot of attention for the way he played in Summer League, 7 feet tall, very good shot blocker, vertical lob threat in the half court, and offers the kind of athleticism in the front court that the Pelicans could use. He is considered a really good fit for the Pelicans. Yes, he is raw, but if the Pelicans can get him on a cheap contract, and he only made slightly above $2 million last year, you are getting him in a situation where he can prove it, much like Kevon Looney. Imagine if you had a trio of Bassey, Misi, and Looney. I think you are getting a serviceable rotation at center, whereas right now the Pelicans are considered one of the worst center rotations. I think adding a third person to the mix would be really good for the New Orleans Pelicans. Another guy that has potentially been talked about is Amir Coffey. And Chaz in particular has been a guy who's focused on Amir Coffey and what he could bring. Now, what Coffey is a underrated shooter. I think that he's the kind of player who can space the floor for you. He plays good defense. He doesn't demand the basketball. He is somebody who can be a perfect complementary player. But I think the problem there is what you already have, a Sadiq Bey. Those guys kind of play the same position for your team. So I think that you could use somebody like Amir Coffey, certainly. But again, you're minimizing someone else's minutes if you do so. There could be a potential logjam for him. So I think if you did bring in Coffey, yeah, you're getting shooting, you're getting more depth on the wing positions, but neither one of those players, while they aren't particularly flashy and they don't get you on the front page, but I think that this is what the Pelicans are in the position to add at this point, low risk players who have the potential to be better than their contracts. And I think what the Pelicans are at the stage of now is they're not going to overhaul this team the rest of the summer. That's not going to happen. They're just looking for upside. They're looking for players who fit a baseline, who are not going to take things off the table and who could potentially add things to it. So we'll see what happens. But again, low risk in either of those options, whether it's Charles Bassey or if it's Amir Coffey. So I think the Pelicans should take a close look because they've got to add something else before training camp. Reports are from Bleacher Report in particular that Brandon Boston Jr. has been rated as one of the best free agents left on the market. And since the Pelicans have released him, he is looking. He's been targeted by a few teams. One of the teams that is being mentioned for him is the New York Knicks, and that he could go there. The thing that they're saying about Boston is that at 23 years old, last season he averaged 13 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, and almost 2 steals in his 10 starts. 6'7" shooting guard. He has size, a decent isolation score, but could also do a good job on his catch and shoot threes. He made 41% of his catch and shoot threes last year. So it's what's difficult for Brandon Boston is finding a team that has available minutes for him. But if there are teams that are looking for a low cost rotation player, Brandon Boston is certainly an option. It'd be interesting to watch him go to the Eastern Conference and play for the Knicks. And it'll be interesting to see how he develops and if the Pelicans made a mistake in letting him go too early. But I think ultimately they had to let him go just because of his injury status and not knowing if he was going to be ready. And then just he wasn't one of the guys that Dumars brought in. And you can see that Dumars and Troy Weaver are big on having their guys on this roster. Again, ultimately, we'll see how this works. One of the interesting things that I saw is that we're a year beyond this, but people are now taking a closer look 1 year later of the Dejounte Murray-Dyson Daniels trade. And originally, when this trade was graded, most people said this was a win-win deal for both sides, that the Pelicans were getting a guard who was not used the best way in Atlanta, and Atlanta was getting a player in upside in Dyson Daniels who could help with their perimeter defense, and a couple of veterans in Larry Nance, and I can't remember the other guy, but the other forward, but they got what's his name? Was it I'm forgetting his name. He has all the brothers in the NBA. Zeller. Cody Zeller. So you get all these guys in the trade, and you thought that it would be a fairly even swap. But now, when people are revisiting the deal, they're calling it an F for the New Orleans Pelicans. An F, a flat-out failure for the Pelicans. You had Dejounte Murray going from a career high in 22.5 points per game in 23-24. And then just a very mediocre season, if not the worst season of his career since he became a starter for Dejounte Murray. Injuries, no injuries. The ruptured Achilles happens in January, but the season prior, the rest of the games prior, broken hand or not, he was playing bad basketball. On the other hand, you look at Atlanta, and what did they get? Dyson Daniels was the runner-up for most improved player. He makes the all-defensive team. He was runner-up for defensive player of the year. The Hawks also got 2 future first-round picks. And they are able to come back and make the deal this year to get the trade for Derek Queen to get that pick. So beyond the injuries, the Pelicans gave up draft capital. They gave up a young guard on a good timetable and a good contract without really upgrading their roster in hindsight or getting consistent enough returns for what they gave up. The Pelicans thought that they were going all in around Zion and CJ, but ultimately, CJ's now gone. Dejounte is sidelined till probably January on his own, maybe longer. And you are still in the position of you have to replace Dejounte Murray in the short term and try to find a way to deal with his contract in the long term. If people believe that he's going to return stronger than ever, I'd have to caution that, because there were some parts of Dejounte Murray's game that were declining before he got to New Orleans, particularly on the defensive end. In retrospect, this could be the turn for the Pelicans for the far worse. Joe Dumars has the opportunity to turn things around, but this could have been, because of the going all in nature of it and it not paying off and the picks that you gave up, the draft capital you gave up. 5 years from now, we could look at that trade as the moment that things kind of fell apart. That is the test for the front office now. How do you make this work? How do you get better when this situation has not gone the way that you would have preferred over the last year? And then you also have the concerns about Dejounte Murray in the locker room and the things that he said about the organization last year, including how he talked about Willie Green in the abstract. He didn't say his name directly, but when you say that we're out there just hooping without guidance, you're not talking about the front office. You're talking about the coaching staff. You're talking about game planning. You've heard them talk about this before. So how do you bring him back and integrate him back into a locker room where he's already said it didn't work? So I think the problems that have come with Dejounte Murray also magnify what you ended up giving away. I'm going to ask you, so when you look at it, how excited were people initially for Dejounte Murray? And do you think that in retrospect, you would have rather protected having that flexibility financially and having a young player versus having Dejounte now? And you can put this in the comments below, do you think that the Pelicans should double down and keep Dejounte and see if they can rehabilitate this investment? Or is it time to move on from him as well? Because I don't see a path back for Dejounte in New Orleans. Even if he figures out how to play, by the time he comes back, the Pelicans should have a stable rotation. You cannot reinsert him into a starting lineup if you're doing well. If you're doing poorly, I don't know what you're going to do if you're doing poorly because you don't have any draft picks. So it's the Dejounte situation to me is just a major, major problem. All right, that's going to do it for today. We'll be back again on Thursday. Make sure you leave your comments below. Doesn't have to be just to the questions I asked. If you got other questions you want me to address on Thursday, go ahead and put those down there. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share, and hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss anything here on Boot Crew Media. You can follow me on social media at DM Grubb on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also find me on Facebook, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Until the next time, this has been the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media. Y'all have a great day.